Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We'll probably get started here in just another minute. Does that sound good to you, Caitlin?
Yeah,
Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, interesting thought, April.
we do tend to skew towards more women in the field for sure.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right, and we're going to continue to let folks pop on in, but I certainly do. We respect your time, and thank you again so much for being so prompt with us today so that we can maximize our time together. Um, Today's webinar, we're so excited to partner together. So first, let me just get to some introductions. My name is Sarah Gage. I've been consulting with nonprofits over the last 10 years. Prior to that, I had the privilege of running nonprofit early learning centers here in Atlanta, where I'm based. Over the last 7 years, I've been a member of the Giveffect family, where I get to consult with all types of nonprofits. But I have specifically had a focus on our animal welfare partners in particular. This is one area that is very near and dear to me. So you may hear my fur babies in the background. Caitlin and I were just chatting about that because, of course, they love to join our calls. So I've given them some new chewies. So we'll see if that keeps everyone occupied today during our chat. I currently lead our training and partnerships at Giveffect. So one initiative is providing helpful content. So for many of our nonprofit colleagues, we are incredibly honored to have one of those incredible partners assisting in leading today's discussion. Caitlin Quinn, current board member of Hearts Speak. I'm going to pass it over to you to give us a little bit more information about you and your role.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm so honored to be here. So, as Sarah said, I'm currently a board member for Hearts Speak, and we'll talk about Hearts Speak in a couple of slides. Before that, until November of last year, I was the director of operations for Hearts Speak for the last 8 years. And before that, I had worked with shelters and with specifically Animal Farm Foundation before that. I was thinking about this before we joined the call. This is my 16th year, I think, in animal welfare, which seems impossible given that I'm only 25, which is what it feels like.
Me too.
But
Me too.
right, exactly. How does that happen with time? Um, but I'm really just very excited to be partnering with Giveffect. I think so often when we talk about marketing, we jump right to the end, right? We start to talk about like, what are the photos? What's the message? What do we want to accomplish? And I think in this webinar, we're really hoping to take it back and be a little bit more strategic and kind of start from a place that will set us up for later success.
Awesome. With that, today we are focusing the discussion around this concept of segmentation and what it looks like for those of us on the ground in animal welfare organizations. We're going to show some use cases and real examples, and we want you to have some actionable items to walk away with today. Of course, we'll leave some room at the end for some Q&A as well, but don't feel like you have to hold back any questions. If you want to go ahead and chat them in while they're, top of mind, if they happen to come up for you, please feel free to do that. But we'll probably tackle the bulk of them toward the end of our agenda. So just a little background, I mentioned I'm with Giveffect now. Giveffect is a software platform that was created exclusively for nonprofits. So it was built as one unit, including the many things that we use every single day running nonprofits. We include 10 systems, so that's what you just see listed here. So by leveraging our technology and automating so much of what we usually do manually, saves our nonprofit clients on average over 30 hours a month. So more time to focus on what tech does not replace, like stewarding relationships with your stakeholders and participants, and that laundry list of about 1,000 things that you've got next to your desk.
And I'm so excited to have a minute to talk to you about HeartSpeak. So HeartSpeak was founded in 2010, and it started as a way for artists to partner with animal welfare organizations. It was founded by a photographer named Lisa Prince, and she just saw this really big gap, especially if we think back to 2010 and our cell phones weren't good at taking pictures yet. So to really get amazing marketing materials meant and being able to partner with artists and professionals meant that we could really elevate the way that we were talking about what was happening in shelters and telling the stories of shelters. And so the organization since then has really grown to be a little bit more full scale in terms of meeting the needs of shelters and rescues when it comes to marketing. So we have a marketing resource center. We do training and education like this. And really our goal is to just amplify your good work by making it easier to connect with the community. So again, I'm really honored to be able to represent HeartSpeak today. I'm newly in my board role, and it feels good to kind of still be cheerleading for HeartSpeak.
So let's just take a little poll as we're kind of just getting introduced here and find out what are your biggest challenges in marketing your animal welfare organization. So when you think about your biggest challenges, we've got some options here for you. Is it reaching your audience, creating compelling content, budgeting constraints, measuring impact, having dedicated marketing communications team member, or being consistent deploying your marketing plan?
And it looks like you can choose
And I
multiples.
think you can pick multiples. So certainly feel free to tag the ones that are at the top of the list for you. We'll give everyone just a moment to think through that. All the above. I definitely understand that, April. Yeah, there should be an all encompassing answer there at the bottom. We'll add that
Right.
in.
So you don't
So
have to check all the boxes. Heather, that's a good one.
mm, all right. Let's take a little look at our results here. And I'm, of course, really nothing's ever surprising to me when we're talking about challenges because there are so many and they are vast, affecting all of us. And honestly, there's not a huge standout. So these
I
were
think I
fitting.
think that means all of the above, right?
Yes, that means all the above. That means that had we had that all the above answer, that would have probably been the one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly indicative of the environment and that we're all facing very similar challenges. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit on some of these as we kind of go through today. And with those thoughts in mind, Caitlin and I have kind of thought through as far as we're thinking about marketing and this topic around segmentation and challenges in general, how we can circumvent some of those and still use segmentation to better captivate our audience. So I'm going to let Caitlin take it away and continue our discussion around those challenges.
Thank you. So I think if we were to boil down some of the big marketing challenges outside of the logistics that we sometimes have to navigate, one thing that we tend to struggle with is really gaining trust. And I think feel free to drop in the chat if this is something that relates to you or you kind of feel this way. But often our work is very misunderstood, right? Like I always have heard from friends and family, like they either thought I rolled around on the floor with puppies and kittens all day, or they thought it was, sad, heartbreaking work where terrible things were happening. And we know that the truth is somewhere in the middle about the work that we do, right? There are some really hard days, there are some really good days, but it's nuanced work, right? And so the public doesn't always really understand what's happening day in and day out. And so that can lead, if our marketing isn't reflecting, some of the activities within our organization, that can lead to issues with awareness about our programs or about the problems, and trust with the community. And so when we kind of bring this back to audience, what we're going to hope to do is solve some of these problems through focusing on our audience. We also struggle sometimes with just sustained engagement, right? This is passionate, powerful work, but that means that sometimes people are moved to action by a single event or something that they feel really strongly about. And if something else catches their attention, they may wander away from us. And so it's the role of marketing to keep them with us, keep them focused on our mission and what we need to accomplish together, because we can't do it without them. And so sustained engagement becomes really important when it comes to the community.
And when we think about things like gaps in data and information, it is something that I think, plagues so many of us, and honestly, some that we're even often unaware of. We use data so much to make informed decisions for the organization in order to set goals that are attainable, and also, there are so many different tools and programs and different ways that data is coming to us, and it's in so many different forms, and that can lead to these data silos where this information exists here, but I have no idea how it corresponds to this information over here. And so, we'll extrapolate on that a little bit more. But yeah, certainly all these things go hand in hand for, some very, common challenges, specifically for this environment.
So when it comes to solving those problems, right? So it's never fun to talk about problems if we don't have a solution for them. But today our solution is going to be making our marketing more audience centered. And specifically, we're going to kind of start from the perspective of what do we do with all these people that we want to be talking to, and talk specifically about segmentation. So while we would love to pack everything into this webinar to be able to talk about, platforms and messaging and things like that, we're starting from zero today to help make sure that all of that other stuff can kind of flow from this place of being very concentrated and focused on who it is that we're trying to reach at any given time. And the reason for that is, as I said, kind of in our intro, we often tend to, by nature of our work being so responsive often to urgency and to the situation in front of us. And when you're dealing with living, breathing animals, like that becomes critical. And so we have to often go from strategy to implementation very quickly. And what that means is that we don't often get this space that we have today to think about the more strategic side of things and how we can become a little bit more focused on audience, even when that response time needs to be quick. And the benefit of that really is the more that we can target who it is that we're speaking to, the more that we can facilitate our messages to make sure that they're reaching the right people, the more that we do see the impact, whether it's on adoptions or on calls for fosters or volunteers, down to our community-facing programs and getting the word out to the right folks in the community who need our support. And I think that it always helps to just kind of remind ourselves why audience matters. And again, because our work is so responsive to the animals in front of us, we sometimes lose sight of the human factor, right? We get very focused on meeting the needs of the animals in front of us, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what it does mean is that sometimes we are chasing after doing our work in a way that makes sense to us, but doesn't always make sense to our community or the folks that we're trying to reach. So one thing that is important to remember, and I want to make sure that we all hear this, with the grace that I'm saying it, is that these messages are not for us. We are not always our audience. And what all that means is that once you become an expert on a topic, any topic, you quickly become less relatable to often the audience that you're talking to. And because you all know so much about animals, because we tend to be very focused on our outcomes and our goals when it comes to our programs, we sometimes forget what it's like to talk to folks who don't know the language in terms of the jargon that we use sometimes, or don't understand how we're measuring success in terms of programs. They don't always even understand why our programs are structured the way that they are, right? So if you have safety net programs or you're doing managed intake, those kinds of things are very hard for the public to understand if they're not laid out kind of sequentially for them and in a way that they can understand. And what happens when we go from we have this idea or we have this emergency and we need to deliver on it and we don't stop to be strategic is that we often are kind of speaking past our audience, and they're left not responding to our calls to action, not responding to the ways that we need them to the most, because they may not understand what it is that we really are trying to ask them. When we make our marketing audience centered, inevitably we build stronger relationships. We build that trust that we're seeking with the community, and we hopefully get to that place where the community is working with us hand in hand to accomplish our goals, because we know that we can't do it without them, but we have to take this time to talk strategy, talk segmentation, so that we can get to that place where we're breaking down silos and inevitably saving more lives. So the other problem that I wanted to bring up to you all is that what tends to happen, and I was so guilty of this during my time in sheltering, is that we tend to talk about anyone not in our building or our sphere of work as the general public, right? Like the public doesn't understand what we're talking about. The public doesn't get it. And we often follow it up with those kinds of phrases, right? Like they just don't understand. When we are able to kind of push past bad habits sometimes of just rushing through, trying to deliver on the product, when we can slow down and be a little bit more strategic, we can eliminate some of that us versus them. It becomes less about, we need you to do this and why aren't you doing this? Because we really rely on you, to, hey, together we can solve a problem, and let me tell you about that problem so that you can become part of the solution. And often these are just subtle shifts when it comes to messaging and the way that we're going to roll out what we want the public to know. But today, again, we're going to back up and talk specifically about who needs to hear these messages and how can we best tailor messages to different groups to get the biggest impact. It's really important to, that we all walk away with the understanding that while we're focusing on audience today, what we are really, driving towards are those more resonant messages and the content that will get you more engagement, that will get you folks who are paying attention, and leading to all of those kind of success markers that we're looking for in terms of lives saved and donations and participation.
Absolutely. And to build on that, as Caitlin was saying, when we're thinking about having more targeted messaging, before we can even talk about the messaging, the message itself, we've got to think about who we're delivering that message to. So when we think about this concept of audience segmentation, it's essentially taking that general public bucket and now breaking it down a little bit further. And so you can even think of this in just personally, the way you might talk with your coworkers, and then think about the way that you chat with your parents, the way that you chat with your best friends. And the chances are that you're communicating with them all a little bit differently. Maybe it's the jargon that's different, some, more colloquial with those that are, closest to you and that sort of thing. And the things that maybe inside jokes and things that wouldn't make sense to your coworkers. We want to think of audience segmentation in a very similar way. You've got these unique groups in your audiences that will have unique interests and needs, and audience segmentation will help you align those traits. So let's look at that a little bit deeper. When we look at, again, we always want to hit these challenges on head first, right? And know that we get it. So let's identify what some of these challenges are. And we're thinking about, okay, how can I, when I think about my general population, the general public, and I want to break those down into different groups, okay, what are some things that might be in my way? When you think about your overlapping group types, Volunteers might also be donors. Adopters may also be volunteers, right? You've got, people who are participating in these various areas. Um, Also maintaining multiple segments. So some of us identified in that poll that human capital is the challenge and being consistent. So when you're talking about developing and maintaining multiple segments, that requires time, resources, and analytical capabilities. So the third thing here, coordinating consistent messaging and experiences when you're thinking about this across various channels. You've got social media, email, website, everywhere your brand is visible and people are seeing you, and having that consistent messaging across all these various areas that you have messaging. So also balancing the personalization and the generalization. And again, this is, touches back on what Caitlin was referencing, striking that right balance between personalized content for specific segments or populations and maintaining a cohesive brand message. So even though everyone's not getting the same blanket statement, but that it all still sounds like you. It sounds like your brand. It sounds like this organization that you support. So we'll get into that again. We're dig a little bit deeper through an actual example.
So the other thing that I think is important as we move forward and start to get a little bit more specific, speaking about segmentation, is that we recognize that there's not going to be a one size fits all approach that's going to work for every single person on this call. This is going to be something that you have to tailor to your set of resources, and whether that's human resources or monetary resources, and also where you're starting from. Some of you may be sitting on a larger pile of data or client, adopter, foster, donor information that you've collected over years. Some of you might be starting from zero and trying to figure out how do I collect this information and how do I organize it. So we're going to go through how this can look different depending on what your resources are. But I think that when it comes specifically to segmentation, what we are really doing is targeting specific community members, and trying to get them the message that is going to most move them to action, right? So when we know who it is that we're speaking to, we are better setting ourselves up for being able to tailor a core message into something that is going to move that specific person or that specific group to action. I think that sometimes when we talk about segmentation and getting a little bit more granular, getting a little bit more specific about who we're talking to, one of the reactions that I see sometimes is this immediate, like, but I want to talk to the general public all the time. I want to talk to everybody all the time and wrap my arms around them as the general public because I don't want to miss anybody. We're talking about saving lives. We don't want to leave anybody out in the cold. And what I'm going to argue is that actually by trying to reach everyone with the same message and the same methods of communication, we're doing exactly that. So it's a little counterintuitive, but as we can get more specific about who it is that we're trying to reach, we can actually better serve our messages, reach more people inevitably. So what I want all of us to hear is that this doesn't mean that we're leaving anybody out in the cold when we try to get more specific. In fact, we're going to try to find those places where people overlap in their different roles and make sure that we get them the message that feels tailored to them and doesn't feel impersonal, which is such a big part of this conversation. We also want to make sure that we're focused on being more considerate and thoughtful about how each person is adding value to our work and to our conversation. So when we were talking a little bit about silos of information, which we'll talk about more, we gave the example of like volunteers or sometimes donors. That's an easy one, right? One that's going to challenge us, I think, a little bit more is sometimes folks that we're serving on the community side of things, who are maybe using our food pantry or using some of our community-based services, should also be marketed to for adoption. And sometimes folks who have been previous adopters should be marketed to for community services. So like there are overlaps that we are not looking from that kind of big picture view from that we're going to challenge you to also try to find. What it does mean when we're talking about segmentation is that we need a little bit of good data. And again, we know some of you are starting off in different places with this, but the rule of thumb is going to be like good data in is good data out. So we have to start with a little bit of information, and it'll help to have this discussion because it'll set you up for success in the way that you're building your forms, in the way that you're collecting information from the start. If you start to think about like, what might I want to talk to this person about in the future, and what information do I need to do to gather to do that. And finally, it does mean collaboration between operations and marketing. So this probably a whole other presentation that we could do, but often our departments, even if those departments are just one person or part of their time, are a little bit siloed within our organizations. And marketing cannot exist independently of any of the other departments within your shelter or rescue. So in order to collect that good data, marketing folks have to work really closely with those that are running programs so that we're making sure we have sign up forms in place to collect information, so that we are, making QR codes that'll be useful to keeping in touch with folks. All of those kinds of decisions need to happen collaboratively. So before we get into the nitty gritty, I have this example that if you've seen me give a presentation before, I hope that you haven't seen this, but it's one of my favorite examples. So it's worth trotting out again and again, because I think that this is a great example of what can happen when we start really from this technical place of talking about segmentation and getting really strategic. The end goal can be incredible. And this is from a campaign that Austin Humane Society did several years ago. I think it may be 10 years or more ago. But what I love about this is they were really great about collecting some pre and post data that can help speak to the true impact that this campaign had. So because Austin Humane Society started from a strategic place of knowing who they wanted to reach in their community, they were able to design a campaign that really did have its arms wide open around a lot of different segments that they were trying to reach. But they then were able to use this message and this campaign to target different groups in their community. So the campaign was very much based on human-animal connection. So all of their ads, their graphics that they built were all built around this message of like, you do this, I do that. And that relationship that we develop with our pets that is so in step and kind of symbiotic. And it always landed on a call to action like, you pick me, I heart you, you support me, I heart you, all of that kind of thing. So you can see that they could use this easily for adoption, but that they could also customize it for people that they wanted to foster, people that they wanted to get more volunteer on the volunteer side of things, folks that they wanted to become donors. And this told a story about their organization that they then were able to tailor to different groups. And you can see by some of the numbers on the screen that this had a huge impact. And this is really just kind of our moment to pause before we get into the nitty gritty to say this is worth this little bit of effort to think about segmentation and how we can start to develop a more strategic plan, because look at what can happen. Over $100,000 raised for their annual appeal, a 13% increase in contributions from the year before, increased adoptions, increase of volunteer hours. All of that is huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a great place to introduce the segmentation a little bit further, and then we are going to stop for a brief poll. So as you're thinking about data strategy, and here we're really looking at kind of the evolution of what we can be using. And some of us are using more than one of these things, or maybe most are in a certain area. Each has different benefits. So, it may be in that nothing is wrong. So if you're using a lot of paper resources, applications, things like that, and storing things in files and that sort of thing, it's not wrong. There are benefits for each of these, and they're just different. So we do feel that the more you can organize digitally and integrate all the various areas that you're receiving information about your participants, it requires less of your time. So the more that you can shift toward digital responses is ideally going to save you more time. So then you can spend that time thinking more about looking at that data and analyzing the data versus the collection part. So let's pause there to take a brief poll and think about this. Again, how does your team currently centralize your data? So when you think about centralizing your data, you're pulling in all this different information from all these different areas, your participants at various different levels. Is that mostly via paper? Is that mostly Excel spreadsheets? Do you maybe have some separate systems, like maybe you're using something for email marketing platform, maybe like MailChimp, Constant Contact, things like that. Maybe you're using something for donations. Maybe you have a donate button on your website and that information is going somewhere. Maybe you have a platform software that you're using for events. Maybe you're doing online fundraising outside of your donate button, or maybe you're hosting live events. Shelter operations. I'm sure you're probably using some software for that. On average, again, people are typically using at least 4 to 6 systems if you're using some software. And then some of you may be using like a more all-in-one tool that is a little bit more inclusive. Something like Giveffect, and we'll take a look at some examples here. But where do you find that you're at? Let's look at some of the responses. Okay, so a lot of folks are using a lot of separate systems, and honestly, that is very typical. That is the majority of what we see in my past in these years, especially working at Giveffect, where so people are typically coming because of this problem, because they're like, okay, we've shifted, we've moved from paper onto these online platforms, but I still feel like we're still managing all these various pieces and we want it to be easier. It's interesting to see. It's interesting to see. That's great.
And Nanette said in the chat, which I think is also so relatable, that they're a growing organization. So they have multiple people with many kind of hands in. So they have good documentation, but it's not easily shared between individuals, which I think is another kind of stress point that's pretty common.
Absolutely. It's just exactly the visibility. So especially as Caitlin was talking about different departments, even though often a department may be a department of one person, but still that one person or a couple people are using this one program, and then everyone over here is using something different. And so we don't know if we've got a person that exists in each of these. We just get that one view of this person and this participant. And that really is brings us to this next image. It kind of depicts what we so often see in the sector. If we're using software systems, we're often using some sort of sheltering software, something to maintain volunteers, something for donations, something for events, something for emails, website. I mean, the list really goes on. When you really start to think about all the different technology that you're touching all the time, or if it is these paper documents and applications and things that you're also getting on top of all these other things, then this circle widens. This is our siloed data challenge, with so many systems that don't talk to each other. Just like Nanette was saying, this disparate data is what contributes to our challenge in audience segmentation, because it doesn't allow us to see group overlap without creating some massive spreadsheet, probably, right? Which is possible. It's all possible. Or maybe some importing and exporting. Maybe we're importing things from our, kind of our sheltering software, and we're kind of just, maybe putting things in there so we can kind of have it in one spot. So it's often just kind of we're manipulating the tools that we have to try to make that work, and that's certainly an option too. So then you've also got, of course, like, all-in-one solutions like Giveffect that are intended to centralize data. So it provides that one-stop shop for all your departments to kind of get an accurate and 360-degree view of all of their participants, all of your contacts. And Caitlin, I know you probably have some thoughts to add with your experience.
I do. I just want to say that I can deeply relate to everybody that's kind of saying like it's a mess in the chat. Heartspeak is a deceptively small organization. There was only ever two of us behind the scenes. And so I can remember a time when Google Sheets came out, right? And that we were just like, well, this will be the solution. We'll just start to like use Google Sheets. It'll save our lives. And the amount of, exporting from one system and trying to find the overlaps manually, and, it becomes exhausting and a job in and of itself. And so then we would avoid it. And so I can really see how that becomes, the bane of our existences is if we can't get our hands around that data, it becomes too easy to not start to talk about segmentation because it's challenging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's look at an example of what it looks like when you are centralizing your data, or what centralized data looks like. This example is just pulled from one of our clients at Giveffect. And with that, what they've basically done is begin to take that general public bucket and start to break it down into smaller bites. So we look at that as just basic groups. We're just grouping people by levels of participation. And in this particular example, they've classified various groups of focus. So this is their segmented population in one place. And you can see these little types of groups. So really just seeing a list of different types of groups that they've created. And then alongside of that is just how many people exist in each group. And of course, there may be some overlap here. So we'll touch on that as well. But basically, outside of just creating these initial groups, there's also technology out there that can help you in pre-tagging people. So you don't actually have to, once you've kind of defined your groups, you don't have to keep reorganizing folks when you get new folks in the door and new applicants, new volunteers, new donors. So a lot of technology like Giveffect will help you pre-tag these applications and these different campaigns that you're sending out, and people who are signing up to get your newsletters. And instead of you having to add them into these different groups, when someone completes the application to foster, the software automatically adds them into the foster group right here in the database. And then their foster application details and responses all get added to their record. Then when that person completes a volunteer application, the software automatically adds them to the volunteer group. And now their volunteer application and details also get added to their record. When they make a donation, yep, you guessed it, all that gets added. They get added to the donation group, the donors group. So that just continues to happen, layers on itself every time people are participating. So there are options out there that are a little bit more hands off, but otherwise, if you maintain just a couple larger categories of group sizes, this can still be done with your separate software systems and still being able to group people. When you look at this next example, you're going to see more groups. So this is a humane society that is using a variety of data map groups to kind of drill in a bit deeper. You're really seeing those same categories that we saw in the previous example, but instead of having one group of volunteers, they have volunteers by event. Instead of a large group of donors, they have donors by event or campaign. They have adopters by type of animal. Since they have all different types of animals at this particular humane society. And then even more granularly, their groups are then broken down by year. So why would this be helpful versus the previous example? They can still be used in a similar way, but by having them even more targeted in these groups, it would be really easy to determine who volunteered in last year's event, thank them again, and invite them to this year's event. If you've got things that, are happening annually. Providing adopters an ongoing series of helpful content for pet training, for general care, for emerging trends and care practices, all specific to their type of pet, since we know that information. So instead of sending something more general that says, here, this for small animals, this for cats, this for dogs, you can send all the folks that have cats just information about that, instead of having them click on things and it says, hey, I know you have cats. So in addition to that, you could also easily determine those who have participated in an event in multiple years in a row, and maybe offer them VIP seating or some benefit, something that says, hey, thanks so much for your continuous support. We want to recognize you in this way. So all in all, your stakeholders, all your participants are feeling more seen, not in this blanket messaging, but rather we can provide messaging that's very specific to their type of interaction, their type of involvement, and overall their investment in your organization.
And I feel like one of the big takeaways I had when I looked at these two slides was that you kind of need to start from a place of knowing your tags too, right? Like sitting with kind of what are the buckets that we are going to want to create for folks, no matter what tool you're using. Because if this is all done, if you do this as you go and you're kind of doing this in a way that's not thoughtful from the beginning with tags, you can end up with some kind of mismatched information in the end. So I like that, everything is kind of standardized in this, even though they got more granular. It's very simply like adopter 2017, adopter 2018, adopter cat 2018, all of that. It's very well organized from the beginning. They kind of knew those buckets, which I feel like is sometimes counterintuitive, right? Like we want to start going through people and just like sifting them. But if we don't know what we're sifting them into, it can get really messy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Step one is definitely determining who are your focus groups, and two, your bandwidth, right? Like having all these nuanced groups is more to maintain if you're doing that more manually. So certainly deciding on, okay, these are the four areas that we think that we can maintain, or however many that you end up coming up with. Yeah. And let's see, lastly, here is just an example of how groups can be automatically captured and added into a participant's profile. So here is just a clip of someone's record in the system. So that way I could easily see every type of participation and how this person has engaged with the organization. So just wanted to show you some contrast where you're getting visibility of both levels. In the last examples, you're seeing it in its entirety, kind of those big picture groups, versus here, we're kind of zooming in on one contact. So if you want to zoom in, then you can begin to see an individual's level of engagement over time, start to identify patterns and trends, especially for people who are really highly engaged with your organization, and just thinking about how we can continue that engagement. How can we continue to provide them the things that they're most interested in?
I really like that having your data organized begets more good data, essentially, right? Like, so once you can identify some of those trends, if you notice that like the majority of your participants in a certain program are between a certain age, you then are going to modulate where those messages go to those people in the future, right? Like you're going to target platforms where you're more likely to find those audience members. And I just want to give that example in terms of like, how will you use this kind of beyond just getting organized into the future? This is how you'll make those future marketing decisions.
Absolutely.
So we're just going to take a moment and just for you to even jot down the answers to some of these questions for yourself. Often with a webinar like this, you're getting a lot of information. And then I used to have this moment after webinars or after conferences where I would just go, that was incredibly valuable, and I have no idea what to do next. And it's information overload sometimes. And so jotting down, some notes for yourself can then help you have the inevitable next conversation you have to have with some of your coworkers, or, the decisions that need to be made internally going forward. So for right now, what programs and activities are creating interactions with people? And this will be kind of your first clue into some of those buckets or tags that we were talking about. So are you primarily an adoption agency? Is there a way for you to break down adoption into, cats, dogs, small creatures, whatever it is that you serve? Is there a way for you to start to document or start to organize your foster information and what you're collecting on those forms and those interactions? Do you have a community clinic, TNR outreach? Anything that you do provides an opportunity to potentially collect data that you will use moving forward. And so just take a moment to jot down, maybe your top 4 that you can think of right off the bat. And the second question to kind of follow up with this is, how are you engaging with those audiences currently? So are you currently just kind of using a couple of platforms? Does it tend to be more of a one-way street of information, right? So are you sending out email blasts? Are you posting on social but not answering questions there, things like that? Start to document those interactions as well, so that you can start to think about, like, what are your most used platforms, and inevitably, how are we going to identify which of those platforms to move forward with as we get more cozy with our data.
Cozy with data. I love that. And as we, yeah, I know I'm keeping an eye on time too, and I want to leave room for Q&A. So let's go ahead and we'll hit the next example of basically, now that you're cozy with your data, you've got all this data, and these groups are set. What are you going to do with it? So here's an example just of one of our client examples, and using Giveffect. Because it's a 10-in-1 solution, it has email integrated into the same platform as the data on your contacts and your program participants. So it basically will help you communicate in a little bit more of a personalized way using the data that you have. But essentially, anyone can use groups for emailing more specific content and calls to action. So because I've got now these identified groups, I know exactly how people are interacting, and my language can be specific to that group. So it offers, specifically here, you're just seeing a little bit more of the dynamic variables for personalizing at scale. This is an example specifically for when a donation is made in dedication to somebody else. Then that somebody else is getting this personalized communication. Hey, someone made a gift in your honor, and because of this, this person's gift, we're able to do X, Y, and Z. So every recipient of this email is going to get a customized message where those merge fields or replacement variables will be updated in real time. And then if we look at the next example, we're going to see this is an annual event invitation series. And so we're going to see a couple pieces of this invitation series. So it is going out this one to this part of the series, and it's for their annual event. So the annual event is called Paws, Claws, and Corks, and they got a lot of fun things that go along with this event, like a live and silent auction, and it's they purchase tickets. It's got a sponsorship attached to it as well. So basically, this in this particular email that you're seeing, it is going out to those groups of people who have in the past few years have volunteered and or have attended this event and or are event partners like sponsors. And they're also including major donors in this invitation as well. And I say and or because software like, all-in-one software like Giveffect will only message the individual once, even though you have that overlap. So as we know, we all likely do. and in more, you may have a person that's in more than one of these groups. So just all going to show that software can really help account for the overlap, so you're not email fatiguing your valuable participants. And email fatigue does come up a lot, because we do have a lot of communication. So outside of using a software to assist with that, relying on your groups will help with message fatigue. And so we're not sending out so much messaging, but we're sending out messaging that actually resonates with its recipient. If we look at the next part of this case study, this part of the annual event invitation series is going out to the general public. And so that all of those who are unable to attend in person can still participate in the virtual silent auction, or maybe they can just donate directly to the campaign. So this is allowing the opportunity for, even if I'm not physically in the area, or maybe the price point of attending is just outside of my range, I just can't afford to purchase that ticket. They're still offering other options for people to be able to engage in this particular event. So people can still participate virtually. If they can't purchase a ticket, maybe they can still give $5 or $10. And we're always still happy to receive those gifts. And then when we look at the last part of just the focus part of this case study, in the next slide, it really just, is just a thank you message going out to everyone after the event. And this really says it all. They raised over their fundraising goal for the first time in 5 years. And a lot of that was using the targeted audience messaging sequence. It had a huge outcome. And so that's something that, really shouldn't be overlooked, even though they had to really think about who we're communicating to and building out that strategy and that plan. In doing so and creating a couple different emails going out to different groups, it really paid off for them in the long run.
And I think that this reminds me of, there's such a big conversation often when we're talking about marketing, especially currently, about authenticity kind of being the leader of the day. And I think it's really hard to know what authenticity means. Sometimes it sounds so buzzy and like it's really hard to unpack that sometimes. But I think this level of looking at the strategy behind a campaign like this offers you an example of authenticity. What it really means in this case is making sure that the communications were thoughtful and personalized enough so that those receiving them felt like, oh, I can really relate to this. This feels like, I didn't get 7 of the same email. That feels like they're being thoughtful about the way that they're approaching me. They know a little bit about what my interests are. And so that, I think, is what we really mean when we're talking about authenticity in marketing, is this idea that we have concentrated on the relationship with those that are receiving the message.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we'll go over these very quickly because we want to leave time for questions and answers. But really the biggest takeaway message is that by being organized about the audience that we currently have data on and thinking about how we want to build audiences in the future so that we can collect some data and information, we are inevitably making our future communications stronger, because the next phase of this discussion would be about how do we ensure that our language, our messages are going to be resonant with the people that are receiving them. So this is kind of step one in making this more strategic. But it really does start with being very thoughtful about who it is that we want to talk to and who it is that we're missing right now.
All right, we have a couple questions here. So let's go ahead and see. Okay, so to be audience centered and less about what we know, would you advise to do some kind of survey?
I love a survey. And I think that it can really help in that I often find survey results really surprising in the best way possible, in that we often really think that we know who our audience is or what they want to hear from us. And doing a survey to kind of level set and actually get their input so that we're not just always guessing at what they want or what they need from us can be an incredible conversation starter internally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely always support a survey. Uh, and two, that'll help centralize your data, wherever you're, whatever you're using to collect that data, then you'll be able to collate things there and start to group people, that sort of thing. And then build on that. And let's see. What modalities do you use to reach different audience? They use Facebook, local newspaper, local radio, and newsletters. Any ideas on how to use these modalities and others?
Yeah, so this is going to be deeply personal to your organization and your audience, right? So this is why we choose to kind of start a strategic conversation based on audience, because, if you are using the wrong platform for the audience that you are currently trying to target, like let's say that you are working on growing your younger adoption candidates, right? Or younger donors, any sort of younger folks that you would like to engage with. But you are primarily using the newspaper, we're going to miss out on them, right? That's how all of these decisions that we're going to make in the future grow from a conversation around audience, because there are different large groups that we can generalize about where we're going to meet them, and where we're going to reach them best. But in terms of, the other half of your question, like, do we have any ideas about them? They're all valuable ideas. And what I really love about what you wrote there is that you have a mix of social media and traditional media, and that is so key. So we can't just exist on Facebook and hope that that's going to function as our only way of reaching folks, especially as social media platforms change. That's going to change who is there and who is listening. So absolutely using a blend of a couple of different platforms and strategies is going to be the key.
And that also ties in with Lydia here. And I know we're right at the end, but she mentions, as we move into a digital age, do you think physical communications are still the way to go when reaching out to senior 65 plus donors? This is also something that we just like to ask people in their engagements with us, is how do you like to receive information from us? And a lot of folks do choose letter mail. And so that also is, definitely something to consider. And I wouldn't say that it's a no. And it's also about, it goes back into those tagging and groupings. Who prefers to get information this way? Great. We're going to send that appeal letter out to them, and also save our postage from sending it out to everybody else. And everyone else is going to get that in a beautiful email.
Absolutely. I think traditional marketing can be so incredibly valuable in the way that we reach people. So I would say there's still a big place for that.
Absolutely. And I know we are right on time, and we have some other great questions that we'll just have to email out to you guys. Thank you again so much. We have a couple things on screen here, so please draw your attention there. If you're interested in learning more about Giveffect, there's a QR code to the left, and on the right, please do take a look at Heart Speaks Resource Center. There is so much information there, and so many of our clients at Giveffect have benefited from using so many of the resources there. Out Just so many different types of resources, from images to also helpful information like you heard today in webinar format, recordings, also templates. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot there. So please do go and poke around. And oh, good. I'm glad there's some folks on talking about how they also love those resources.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so please be in touch with us, and we really appreciated getting to share this information with you today. We will be sending out a recording of today's session. So please feel free to be in touch with us with any additional questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here.